All right, hello Honors 410. So here we are at our second to last session here for this class. So I'm going to keep this pretty contained, pretty short, just focusing on Anne McBee's Ruth's Red Ale. So in this story, to start us out, I want to look at the very first paragraph on the first page of this story, page let's see, this is 79 here. Actually, I'm just going to read this whole first paragraph. It was awfully heavy for yeast, a silver packet that distorted their faces in its surface, covered in foreign writing of assorted red color. Adjusting his glasses, Phil stared quizzically at the oddity. It was on sale, Phoebe said. Phil was particular about yeast strains, the ketones and esters and phenols and such. On this occasion, though, he didn't ask why Phoebe had made such an odd selection. They only just learned that Mom's cancer was back. Controllable but not curable, which meant little except that in less than a year, Phoebe would face the inconceivable loss of her mother. Best to let some things slide, Phil supposed, and hassled her as little as possible. So this opening paragraph here, I'm going to leave my discussion of it kind of open-ended, but I wanted to ask the question of what this establishes for us, how we sort of read this, what this kind of sets in motion for the story, and what our understanding is going to be of the major points of focus moving forward from that. Okay, carrying on from that, on the next page here, the middle paragraph, let me read this part as well. So it reads, an initial step in brewing beer was boiling the wort. The sweet, ruddy liquid extracted slowly from malt barley, the yeast would ferment into beer. Phoebe and Phil had successfully mashed their own wort from grain before, resulting in a dazzling, honey-clear ale with tones of lemon from the aroma hops they added. But they'd also botched a batch that way, producing a muddy and too sweet amber that seemed flat. Using the extract saved them a few steps. The strange yeast seemed risky enough anyway. Phil watched the 3-gallon pot on the stove to make sure the foam had formed didn't spill over the sides. A boil-over could ruin a batch of beer, as could burn sugar, so he gently stirred the mixture to prevent anything black and sticky from collecting at the bottom. Adjusting the temperature dials and spritzing the sides of the pot with ice water from a spray bottle now and again when necessary. So this part of the story here, part of why I want to single this out is a lot of what it's doing from my perspective is establishing credibility. So we're talking about this beer making process. It's much more than abstract. It's getting kind of granular here, right? And I think in interesting, accessible ways. I think this is just a really nice demonstration of something all writers can do in some way or another, leaning into your expertise to kind of tap into those things, teaching the reader something, kind of making it more interest just for the inclusion of these extra kind of details here. In addition, it's grounding it in the real world with kind of that practical knowledge and cementing characters in kind of a more secular real world that we all kind of recognize before we get to the more magical elements of the story. Okay, carrying on from there though, I'm not going to read this whole section here, but from pages 84 to 87 here, we have the departure to Phoebe staying with her mom, Ruth, visiting the old house. And I'm curious as to reactions of, why this is here. I think that this is the part where she's otherwise that we're kind of working around in this story. In some ways, the heart of the story. But what we sort of get from this sort of middle section here, again, roughly pages 84 to 87. And then going on to page 89 here, I wanted to read the last, let's see, is this, the last paragraph or so here leading into page 90. So at the apartment, the beer was still fermenting. The airlock's bubbling, as active as ever in its 9th week. Phil had sterilized the equipment and the bottles, expecting Phoebe's blessing and going ahead with bottling. They would first skim off the trub, the vile algae-like detritus of hops floating on top, and then poured in a little sugar solution to prime the beer for bottling. Then Phil would leave the siphoning to Phoebe, who had a knack for coaxing the fluid along from bucket to bottle with a racking cane. And so this whole section here, I just want to kind of go back to what we can sort of get from this, because there's some significant overlap with the earlier section that I cited, where it's just sort of some expert knowledge of this beer making process. But also, I think this whole section, as we go along, does also sort of show something about our characters, their situation, and I think more broadly, sort of how we might kind of read this beer a little bit more symbolically, metaphorically, what it might represent as we go along in that paragraph. So I'm going to leave that open as a point for conversation as well, and kind of let the class kind of engage there. But okay, I'll wrap up there. As always, plenty more to discuss in this story, so please feel free to shoot off in other directions as well. But I will look forward to our discussion and to heading on to our very final session that I'll post tomorrow.